Welcome to Books in 10. Remember, we're raffling an iPhone when we reach 10,000 subscribers. Like, subscribe, and journey with us into this fantastic book. Share with your friends. And let's create the biggest book community on YouTube together.
Oh, there's a link to purchase the book in the pinned comments. Enjoy.
We are accepting book requests to create content within. Suggest the best titles in the comments. Now, let's go.
Okay, so are you ready for a deep dive into Tolstoy?
Absolutely. Today we're looking at the Kreutzer Sonata, which, as always, I know you've already read.
Of course, Tolstoy's a master.
But we're going beyond just, the surface level today. We're going to unpack some of the really dark and shocking themes that he explores.
I mean, he does tackle marriage, desire, jealousy, murder, all those messy human emotions. Really gets to the heart of it.
And all set against the backdrop of 19th century Russia, which adds another layer of complexity, I think.
For sure. So where do we even begin with this one?
Well, we have these excerpts, and they start with Pozdnyshev.
Ah, yes. Our main character, the one who confesses to murdering his wife.
Right from the start, Tolstoy hits us with that. And the whole story, it's from Pozdnyshev's perspective, right? This first-person account leading up to that tragic event.
It's a confession, this outpouring, but it also makes you wonder, can we trust him? Is he being totally honest?
That's what makes it so gripping, right? You're constantly trying to figure him out.
And it keeps you on the edge of your seat.
So these excerpts, they start on this train journey where he overhears this conversation about marriage and divorce.
It seems casual at first, like something you'd overhear on any train ride.
But it's Tolstoy, so of course there's more to it. It's like he's setting up this clash of perspectives on marriage right from the beginning.
It's brilliant. You have this old merchant, very traditional views, talking about how important fear is in a marriage.
Fear. Like a wife fearing her husband?
Yeah, that's what he implies, and it's jarring, especially from a modern perspective.
Totally. But then this modern woman enters the conversation, and she's all about love and equality. Complete opposite.
It's almost like foreshadowing, right? This tension between old and new, between what marriage should be versus what it is for some.
Exactly. It's like a microcosm of the societal shifts happening in Russia at the time.
And then, of course, you have Pozdnyshev listening to all this, and it basically triggers his confession.
It's like that conversation unlocks something dark within him. And he claims that he, and I quote, killed his wife long before the actual murder.
Whoa, chills. That line always gets me. What does he even mean by that?
Well, he goes on to blame his early experiences with what he calls loveless, purely physical intimacy.
So he's saying that his views on relationships, love, all of it, was shaped by this purely physical, almost transactional kind of intimacy.
Exactly. He even uses the word voluptuary to describe himself at that time. It's pretty loaded, right?
It implies that he was consumed by pleasure, seeking it out constantly, almost like an addiction.
And it's like he's saying this early indulgence, it warped his whole outlook on marriage.
It made him cynical about romantic ideals, about the whole institution of marriage, really.
So by the time he meets his wife and gets married, he's already carrying all this baggage, this disillusionment.
Which is crazy because then he describes his honeymoon, which should be this blissful period, as ferocious ennui.
Ferocious ennui, what a phrase.
Right. It evokes this feeling of restlessness, almost a violent boredom, the opposite of what a honeymoon should be.
Exactly. It shows how trapped he already feels, even in those early days of marriage.
So instead of joy and connection, there's this resentment building already.
And it seems like that feeling, that sense of entrapment, it just intensifies as the story goes on.
Because he's stuck in this cycle, this back and forth between passion and hatred.
And he's so brutally honest about the role of physical desire, how it shapes his interactions with his wife. It's almost uncomfortable to read at times.
It's like he can't escape it, this constant push and pull. And then to make things even more complicated, they have children.
Oh yeah, the kids. And his views on children, they're kind of unsettling.
Pozdnyshev. Oh, for sure. He talks about this constant anxiety over their well-being, this feeling that they're a burden in a way.
Right, and he's very suspicious of doctors, especially when it comes to their influence on his wife.
Almost like he resents them, sees them as interfering.
Yeah, and Tolstoy uses this to highlight how children, while being a source of love, they also add this whole other layer of tension to a marriage.
Because they become part of the power dynamic, almost like weapons in a way.
Okay, so we have this volatile mix of passion, resentment, now the added stress of children. And then enter Trukhachevsky.
The musician. He's the catalyst for the final tragedy, right?
Yeah, he's the one who really sets everything in motion.
And it's interesting because Pozdnyshev describes him as a bad man, but he's also drawn to him. It's like he sees something of himself in Tukhachevsky.
And the jealousy just explodes from there. He's convinced his wife is having an affair, even though he admits Trukhachevsky is beneath her.
It's all about control, isn't it? He feels like he's losing his grip on everything, on his wife, on his life.
And we can't forget about the music itself, Beethoven's Kreutzer Sonata. It plays such a crucial role, almost like a character in itself.
It's a symbol of passion, this powerful force that awakens something in both his wife and Tukhachevsky.
And it terrifies Pozdnyshev. He calls music a frightful power, almost like a form of hypnosis.
He's projecting his own anxieties onto the music, onto this idea of losing control.
Because for him, the music represents everything he fears and desires. Passion, the loss of control, the possibility of losing his wife.
And from there, it's a downward spiral. He becomes consumed by paranoia and jealousy, and it ultimately leads to, well, murder.
That's a story for part 2 of this deep dive. We'll be back after a short break. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Kreutzer Sonata. So we left off with Pozdnyshev totally consumed by jealousy. Suspicions about his wife and Trukhachevsky are eating him alive.
It's like the music itself has become this weapon in his mind, fueling his paranoia. And it's so interesting how Tolstoy uses the sonata to explore the idea that art can be both beautiful and dangerous at the same time.
Pozdnyshev keeps talking about music as this frightful power, as if it's hypnotizing his wife. And it's almost like he can't separate the art from the artist, right?
He definitely sees Tukhachevsky as this embodiment of everything he both desires and hates, which I think speaks to that deeper struggle within himself.
It's all tangled up in his head. The music, his wife, Trukhachevsky.
Wow.
And it all explodes during that train journey home. Tolstoy really captures the torment, the way Pozdnyshev is trapped in his own thoughts, replaying these imagined scenarios over and over.
It's claustrophobic, almost, like we're right there in his head, experiencing that descent into madness. Makes you wonder about the nature of reality, how our own thoughts can distort what we see and believe.
It's a powerful reminder of how strong our own internal narratives can be, how they shape our whole world. And when he gets home, the tension is so thick you could cut it with a knife.
The confrontation is inevitable at that point.
And Tolstoy doesn't hold back. He describes the murder in such detail. It's brutal, it's raw.
What I find most disturbing is how aware Pozdnyshev is throughout the whole thing. He's driven by this rage. He calls himself a beast, but he also knows what he's doing. It's this terrifying mix of primal instinct and calculated violence.
It makes you question free will. Was he really in control, or was he overtaken by something darker, something beyond his control?
It's a question Tolstoy leaves us grappling with. Is Pozdnyshev a monster or a victim of his own circumstances? And then there's the aftermath, the way he describes it.
So detached, almost cold. He tries to justify his actions, but it rings hollow.
It's like he's trying to convince himself more than anyone else, but it just leaves you with this unease, a sense of profound tragedy. We have to wrestle with the weight of it all, with these questions about love, jealousy, how emotions can spiral out of control.
We've talked a lot about Pozdnyshev's perspective, but what about Tolstoy himself? What are his views on all this? It seems like there's some overlap with Pozdnyshev's narrative, but it's hard to say for sure.
It's one of the most fascinating things about this novella. How much is Tolstoy speaking through Pozdnyshev, and how much is he using his character to explore these ideas? We know Tolstoy had his own struggles with marriage, and his views on women and sexuality were, well, complicated, especially later in his life.
He went through a huge spiritual transformation, right? Embracing asceticism, rejecting his earlier beliefs. It definitely seems like Pozdnyshev's condemnation of desire and lust echoes some of Tolstoy's later views.
Right, but Pozdnyshev is so flawed, so consumed by those very things he condemns. So is Tolstoy using him as a mouthpiece or as a cautionary tale? I think it's more about exposing the hypocrisy of societal norms.
Because one of the most controversial aspects of the novella is how Pozdnyshev views women.
He sees them as objects of desire, their worth tied to their beauty and their ability to attract men. He even says their education is all geared towards seduction, which is a pretty harsh take.
It definitely feels misogynistic to a modern reader, but again, it's Pozdnyshev's perspective, right?
Exactly, and I think Tolstoy is deliberately using his character to highlight these problematic societal attitudes towards women that were so pervasive at the time. It's a critique, not an endorsement.
Which is important to remember when reading works from another time period.
Uh-huh.
We have to engage with them critically within their historical context.
Absolutely. And speaking of context, we have to remember this novella was actually banned in Russia.
Really? Why?
Because of its portrayal of marriage and sexuality, it was considered too dangerous, too subversive, which just goes to show how much it challenged the status quo.
It really highlights the power of Tolstoy's writing. And speaking of powerful forces, we have to talk more about the role of music in all of this. The Kreutzer Sonata is so central to the story.
It becomes a symbol of passion, something that awakens these deep emotions. And for Pozdnyshev, it's a threat. He calls it frightful, this hypnotic force he can't control.
It's like he sees the music as something that can take his wife away from him, something that can unlock these desires he can't handle.
He fears losing himself in the music and the passion it evokes.
And that fear ultimately leads to the murder. It's as if he's trying to silence the music, to extinguish the passion he sees as so dangerous.
Which is tragic because he becomes a victim of his own interpretation. He destroys everything because of his own warped perception of the music, of his wife, of everything.
It's a cautionary tale about how destructive jealousy and possessiveness can be, how they can twist love into something dark and violent.
And it brings us to the most disturbing element of this novella, the murder itself.
The way Tolstoy describes it is so chilling, so calculated. It's like he's dissecting his own descent into madness, step by step.
And what's striking is his awareness throughout the whole thing, He knows he's acting like a beast, driven by this primal rage. But at the same time, he knows exactly what he's doing. It raises those profound questions about sanity, free will.
And the nature of violence itself.
Exactly. It's all intertwined. And it leaves us with this heavy feeling, this sense of unease. Tolstoy doesn't offer easy answers. He forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths about human nature.
And that's why the Kreutzer Sonata still feels relevant today. The setting may be 19th century Russia, but those themes, jealousy, possessiveness, the destructive power of unchecked emotions, they're timeless.
Absolutely. Think about our modern relationships, the anxieties around infidelity, the pressure to conform to certain ideals. Social media can really amplify those feelings of jealousy and insecurity.
It's like Tolstoy tapped into something fundamental about human nature, something that transcends time and technology.
It's a testament to his genius, really. He understood the human heart, its darkness, and its complexities.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Kreutzer Sonata, what do you think is the most important takeaway? What should our viewers be thinking about?
Well, this is a story about extremes, about the dangers of letting our emotions control us, about how the line between love and hate can blur. But it's also a story that makes us think critically about the structures that shape our relationships, the roles we play within them.
It reminds us that even the most intimate relationships exist within a larger social context, and we can't ignore those external forces.
Right. And while it's a dark and unsettling story, I think it also offers a chance for reflection. It pushes us to examine our own beliefs about love, marriage, desire. How do we navigate those complexities in our own lives?
It's a book that stays with you, for sure. One that sparks a lot of interesting conversations.
It certainly has for us today.
So to all of you watching, we want to hear from you. What resonated with you the most? Do you think Pozdnyshev is a reliable narrator? Let us know in the comments below, and let's continue the discussion.
And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into fascinating works of literature.
Until next time, happy reading. So we're back, and things are about to get, well, really intense.
Yeah, Tolstoy doesn't hold back when describing the murder.
It's almost clinical, the detail he uses, like a surgeon dissecting something.
But it's more than just the physical act, right? He's really getting into Pozdnyshev's mind, this twisted psychology.
Exactly. And we see these jarring shifts between pure rage and this, cold awareness. It's so disturbing.
Yeah, it makes you question, was this a crime of passion or was it planned all along? Is there even a clear distinction?
Because in the aftermath, Pozdnyshev tries to justify what he did, saying it was self-defense, protecting his honor.
But it all feels so empty, like he's trying to convince himself more than anyone.
And that's where I think Tolstoy is so brilliant. He forces us to ask, can we believe Pozdnyshev? Is he a reliable narrator, or is he delusional?
It's that ambiguity that makes this story so powerful, even today. It challenges our own sense of morality, of justice.
We're left with more questions than answers.
And that's the point. Tolstoy isn't giving us easy answers. He's forcing us to confront these uncomfortable truths about human nature.
And I think that's what makes the Kreutzer Sonata so relevant, even though it was written over a century ago.
We might not be living in 19th century Russia, but those themes of jealousy, possessiveness, those intense emotions, they're timeless.
Absolutely. And they play out in modern relationships all the time. The
Mhm.
fear of infidelity, the pressure to live up to these impossible ideals.
And social media, oh, don't even get me started. It's like a breeding ground for jealousy and insecurity.
Right. It's easy to imagine Pozdnyshev today, obsessed with his wife's online activity, every comment, fueling his paranoia.
It's scary to think about how easily those emotions can spiral.
Which is why Tolstoy's insights are so valuable, I think. He understood something fundamental about the human heart.
Its darkness, its capacity for both love and violence.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into the Kreutzer Sonata, what's the most important takeaway? What should our viewers be thinking about?
Well, this is a story about extremes. It's a warning about what happens when we let our emotions control us, how love can turn into hate when it becomes possessive.
It's a reminder that even the most intimate relationships are shaped by the world around us, those larger social forces.
Exactly. And while the Kreutzer Sonata is definitely dark and unsettling, it's also a chance for us to look inward, to examine our own beliefs about love, marriage, and desire.
To ask ourselves, how do we navigate these complexities in our own lives?
It's a story that stays with you, that makes you question things.
It certainly has for us today.
It has.
So to all our viewers out there, we want to hear from you. What resonated with you the most? Do you think Pozdnyshev is a reliable narrator? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going.
And don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into fascinating works of literature.
Until next time, happy reading.